she from I don't know. She wears and go low.
7:27 and a half in Trinidad and Tobago. Well, the Prime Minister, Dr. Keith Rowley, on Sunday hinted at the decriminalisation of marijuana as one of the issues on the legislative agenda coming up in 2019. Also referenced making the Caribbean Court of Justice or final court of appeal. But the conversation related to marijuana picked up steam following a CARICOM report and closed-door meetings held in Trinidad and Tobago with various activists. And indeed, that among those activists, Nazma Mullah, who's been championing that cause for several years, and indeed was able to present a document to the Prime Minister, who just a couple of months ago basically said that this wasn't part of the national agenda. Now it appears to be heading into 2019. What does the law say, and how would decriminalisation impact on the justice system? Well, we're joined now by attorney at law Martin George via Skype. Very good morning to you. Good to have you with us. Good to see you clearly via Skype, Mr. George. What is your own perspective on what we're hearing about the possibility of the decriminalisation of marijuana possession in Trinidad and Tobago?
Yes, hi, good morning to you, Fazil, and good morning, Trinidad and Tobago. And Fazil, just for the record, the color on my jersey, it's navy blue. It's not black and white. It's not an Oreo jersey at all. Okay, so I just want to make that very clear. All right. But, you know, in relation to the Prime Minister's position, which appeared to be a quick about face, which I couldn't quite comprehend, because if it is that you had initially indicated that decriminalization of marijuana was not a priority for the government, it appeared that when he had the face-to-face, well, I guess the confrontation where they met him outside of Parliament, he said, well, look, we don't need to fight over this. You know, we can consider it. But the thing is, considering it, you need to have a specific and clear policy as to what are your objectives. There are several different avenues you can pursue if you wish to take this route. You can look at it from the perspective of the criminal justice system, whereby you can say, look, all right, the courts are too clogged at the magisterial level for persons with a 5-piece or a 10-piece, as it's said in the local parlance. You know, or you may look at it from another perspective. You may say, well, look, for medicinal use, we are going to consider decriminalization, you know, once you meet the specific criterion, like, for instance, if it's in the form of the cannabis oil. So the thing is, I am not hearing any clear objective, you know, apart from, oh, yes, we will decriminalize. It doesn't appear that it's a well thought out policy as yet. Maybe they will get there, but I think they need to articulate what are their goals and objectives first before they look at it. Because there are some states that have decriminalized for the purpose of turning it into profit, whereby, you know, like for instance in California, I think Jamaica is looking at that model also, whereby you know, process and market it for sale, for international export, to earn foreign exchange, you know. Then you have a situation like, for instance, in Amsterdam, where it's legalized for recreational use. You could smoke as much as you wish, you know. So I think we need to have that conversation. And I mean, I'm not sure that he was wrong in his earlier position in that, you know, I'm not sure that it necessarily is the greatest priority for the state of Trinidad and Tobago at this point. I think people have a lot more bread and butter issues that they would probably prefer to see brought to the fore. But I mean, it's something that I guess may have to be dealt with eventually.
And I'm glad you were able to clarify the colors of your apparel and in reference to the Oreo. At least you ain't wearing a sari. Let's put it that way. So we don't have to unravel you in that sense. But let's unravel this situation if we can in a few minutes, Mr. George. Do you therefore see, because you're not seeing, at least from what we heard from the Prime Minister so far, any clear, specific ways of well, as you said correctly, medicinal, decriminalization, and there are many different areas that this could be taken. Is this going to be a very challenging effort by the government if the intention is to decriminalize marijuana?
Well, the thing is, I think first they would need to define for themselves and for the nation what their policy and intent is. That's the only way we can then determine how difficult or easy the path is. I think certainly if you look at it from the medicinal aspect, if it is that there are proven studies to show that it can assist in that regard, then I think that is a much easier sell than to simply say, well, look, we are discriminalizing it for recreational use. So I think they need to start off with, I guess, maybe look for the low-hanging fruit, and determine, well, if this is what we're going for, set out your clear policy, and then you're able to sell it to the public. Then you have to sell it to the parliament because it's something that would require legislation. I saw one of the advocates, in fact, I think Ms. Muller suggested that, the government should immediately instruct the police to, not focus on arrests for marijuana spliffs and these kinds of things. But that's not something you can do without legislation. In other words, your legislative underpinning has to be dealt with first, and then you deal with it otherwise. And then bear in mind that sometimes when the police arrest persons for maybe a 1-piece or a 5-piece, and then they trace them, they realize, look, this person is wanted on warrants for other things. So, we have to be careful and logical in our approach to it, and not just take a knee-jerk reaction and say, well, everybody's doing it, so it's in style now, so therefore, yes, I will say we're going to decriminalize.
Is there any jurisdiction that, well, in fact, I'm sure that there are many, and you referenced some of them as far as the United States, Colorado, for example. You talked about the Netherlands and Switzerland. I was listening this morning where they are actually preparing themselves for the further development of their legislation, because right now it is only legal for medicinal purposes.
Right, and remember Canada also. Remember Canada is making a big push.
As well. So is it something that we can follow the prescriptions of other countries to help us along in making this decision?
But that's exactly the point, Fazil. I don't see that we need to reinvent the wheel. But as I say, we need to define what our objective is. Different states in the US, different countries around the world have defined what their objectives are. I think St. Vincent, our regional neighbor, they have clearly indicated that their purpose is for the wholesale production, marketing, and export for the purpose of earning foreign exchange, So therefore, if that's your intent, then that's a different thing, as opposed to saying you're making it available for local consumption, right? So I think that's where the government needs to first define what is its objective, and then now you package it in terms of selling the idea to the public and to your fellow parliamentarians.
And in the few minutes that you have, you talked about the issue as to whether or not it is actually a priority. How would you respond to the assertion? And I think the Prime Minister presented it on Sunday as well. And as you said yourself, it's interesting that he's now come around to this way of thinking when he wasn't arguing that case at all, about the fact that as far as the legal system is concerned, how it is clogged up with so many young men who are being held for these offenses, either on remand, and that if just purely for the purpose of making the system a lot more fluid and saving a lot of these young men from being in a criminalized environment, that they could become hardened criminals, that in itself makes it a priority.
Well, okay, here's what, Fazil. We also need to be a little bit creative and inventive at times. So maybe what we can look at is, if you have a certain limit, maybe you'd say either 2 grams, 3 grams, 4 grams, I don't know what would be acceptable. But if you can then now try to implement maybe something like a ticket system, the same way for traffic offenses, right? You can issue someone a ticket, they have the option to pay it, no record is made on their sheet, to say, well, look, you have a conviction or anything of this sort. And you then also have the option, if you are challenging it, to say, well, look, okay, I want to go and have my day in court. But just that alone will reduce the number of cases coming through the courts, and you therefore now have effectively decriminalized it, and you've also reduced the clog on the courts, and you've done it in a way that is making it a whole lot simpler than to go the full broad brush way of saying, well, look, across the board, we are decriminalizing it. So that's something that you could be considered. So in other words, in a roadblock, you stop someone, right? Okay, they are found with what appears to be, they take into the police station, it's weighed. If it's found to be less than the acceptable amount, less than the minimum amount, then you issue them the fixed penalty notice, just as you do with a road traffic ticket. Right? They have the option within 14 days, they pay the fine. That's the end of it. So in other words, you are dealing with it without now having to go the full, road of saying, well, look, I'm decriminalizing across the board. So these are options that the government has, and I think that they need to, first of all, as I say, define clearly what is their objective. But I still maintain, I think that most of the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago would agree that there are other issues which also are clamoring for attention from the government.
And indeed, right now, we're spending a lot of attention on the color of your clothes. And I'm glad that you were able to clarify that it's not black and white in the manner of the Oreo, but it's dark blue and white. Attorney at Law, Martin George, thank you very much for taking the time to offer a perspective to us. And indeed, it is something that we may make light of it, but it is something that has clearly gathered the attention of the Prime Minister, courtesy of the advocacy of many individuals and organizations throughout the region and here in Trinidad and Tobago as well. And no doubt we'll have the politics tied into it when it comes up in the Parliament next year. As the Prime Minister says, it will be presented. So we'll have to wait and see how that unfolds, and we'll enjoy the bacchanal that goes along with that. 7:38 in Trinidad and Tobago. We'll be back right after this break.